so much for joining. It's always great to see members of the public coming to these meetings, and I hope we get to the point, which may happen soon, where we need to find an alternative venue, because there's not enormous amounts of space here for public being present. So yeah, I'd like to think that we might need to reconsider a venue soon if we're reaching capacity. So welcome. Really lovely to see you. Thank you for coming. So for those, I think everyone is aware, but in case no one, in case there's any doubt, I am Sarah Taylor. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Norfolk, and this is basically the primary meeting at which I hold the Chief Constable to account on behalf of the public, and held to account both with respect to day-to-day work, but also with respect to the current police and crime plan, which was developed by my predecessor. So just some quick housekeeping. It's a hybrid meeting, obviously being held here and then online. So it is being recorded, because we made a copy of that available via our website afterwards. Have we got anyone? Yes, one person. Gav, please keep yourself muted. And if you do happen, I think we're good. Everyone on laptop, please make sure that you're muted. Make sure you're turned to silent. If you've got mobile phone with you, could you just turn that to silent, please? We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if the alarm does sound, then we will evacuate. We'll go downstairs and meet in the outside car park. I think that's all the housekeeping. Item 1, or declarations of personal and/or prejudicial interests. None on my part. Any from around the table? No. Thank you. Apologies for absence have been received by Sharon Lister, who is a member of our senior management team. I think everyone else is present. Are there any other apologies?
Not from our side.
No. Okay. Thank you. Okay, and then just to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting held on Monday, 22nd of July, I haven't had any response back on those. Have you received any?
Okay.
Are we okay to take those as read? Or
Yes, I just kindly shared the minutes a while ago.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
Lovely. And then we did have a series of actions. I don't know if it's worth just very quickly running through those.
Yeah, of course.
Do you want to?
Yeah, happy to. So I believe the first action, you asked me some timelines around the acoustic noise cameras that is being trialled in Great Yarmouth. The first camera was installed in November 22. That was part of the Department of Transport 7-week trial. We were one of 3 sites chosen in the UK. However, at the moment, an acoustic recognition camera is currently installed in Yarmouth. That was obtained through Home Office Safer Streets funding, which also funded a licence. The licence runs out at the end of this financial year. So we are in discussions with Great Yarmouth Borough Council as to the extension of the licence for the software. And that will probably be something that we'll pick up with you during budget setting as well, Commissioner. There was then an action around deferred prosecution, which I think was for Nick.
So we did submit that, Commissioner, is it not in the updates?
So there was an action. The action was for Nick to obtain a timeline as to reoffending in relation to the new outer court disposals pathway. That was a new approach implemented at the end of February 24. Yeah. What I can report is that by the end of July 24, the pathway had been used by 43 young people. The interventions for those young people go on takes an average of 3 months to complete. Yeah. That's an average depending upon availability and the type of diversion. For all types of diversionary outcomes, the Norfolk Youth Justice Service tracks the reoffending for the individual children for 12 months from the date that they received their diversion. So a 3-month, on average 3-month input and 12 months tracking of subsequent offending. some of the children who received the intervention as part of this tranche are still completing the intervention. So it's a bit too early to monitor effects and see what the offending outcome of that cohort has been. But we will continue to monitor that as it's increasingly something that we're keen to explore, but it's just a bit premature to analyse.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I realised my confusion is because there was an action in between those two, but it was for this office with respect to sharing consent from a question as someone who submitted a question. It just threw me slightly, so that's just to explain my momentary confusion, but I believe that has been done, that consent was obtained, and so that was around a question regarding talking, I believe.
Yes.
So hopefully that has been picked up. In brilliant, thank you. Right, just to explain that, and then
So fourth action then was for myself to confirm the figures to you as to the costs of, it says of court delays, but specifically we have focused on the costs of the victim and witness service. So I know you're aware of this, Commissioner, but on the basis of being a public meeting, the victim and witness service are the team who support victims and witnesses on the run up to trials. Every time a trial is postponed or delayed, it creates a demand on that team to contact the victims again, reset the court dates, find out availability, and obviously the longer we have people waiting for trial, the more update and support that team is required to give to victims. You'll be aware that there are significant and sustained court backlogs that were not great before COVID, continue to be incredibly challenging, and particularly in Crown Court don't see any signs of reduction. As a result of the pandemic, we were in receipt of some funding to help fund the victim and witness service. However, that funding runs out at the end of the financial year, which leaves Norfolk and Suffolk, because it's a joint team, with a cost pressure. The joint cost is £349,000, 340, but 349. The Norfolk share of that is 197. So it's a significant cost that policing is having to absorb because of the court backlogs. The bit that's impossible for us to cost is that in each of those crimes as well, there will be an investigating officer who on top of that will be wanting to maintain their own contact with victims and witnesses. And that's just very, very difficult for us to cost for any with any accuracy. So I would say that 197 is a significant underestimation, and it's just the cost of that central team. Have I missed anything on that, Julie?
No, that's it. So
thank you. And just on that, I will continue to be heroically optimistic, I think is probably a phrase, that lets us make a difference. But just in the just to follow up from some of the panels I was on during the conference period, I will write a letter to the MOJ, just setting out what these backlogs mean and the continued reduction in sitting days within the court system. So I will write a letter to the MOJ just setting that out really clearly. So notwithstanding everything that you said around the investigating officers, those other indirect costs, if there's anything else that occurs to you following this meeting, particularly given the content around the Boars team that you put in the papers for this meeting, please just send a quick email setting that out and I'll incorporate that into the same letter.
So what I might ask either Laura or Sue to find is, I'm told that there was an article in the Times earlier this week which was suggesting that there might be a further reduction in available sitting days within the court, and of course that would only exacerbate the problem further. I appreciate that's just a report in a newspaper, albeit a reputable one. But I think it's a real concern, so it'd be helpful if we could find that to inform, if you were going to write a letter, I think it would be helpful to inform.
No, that sounds great, thank you.
we could probably also provide some examples of cases where the delays have been significant, because we do have some now that are ramping up to about 8 or 9 years
Right, because we have obviously spoken around some sexual violence kind of cases, and I'm aware of this absolutely sort of intractable delay. So again, just a couple of instances would be helpful. I've also taken regard to the some cases now being set for spring 2026.
Correct.
So, and that again, it just compounds the need to just keep putting a bit of pressure within the Ministry of Justice, I think. So, as I say, it might be unduly optimistic to think that one part of government would pay for another part of government's failure, but we, you know, I live in hope, and I think we just need to keep that sort of
I
that
welcome
dialogue
that. So
going. Okay.
thank you.
All right, so if you're able to hunt down that Times article, then get that through in the next couple of days, if possible, then that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Final action, I believe, related was for PCC being the crash system.
Yes, I think, Commissioner, you asked about environmental factors that impacted on killed and serious injury collisions and wide road traffic incidents at the last meeting, and how our crash system, which is where we record these incidents and accidents, allows us to record that information. So we have looked at that. The system itself does allow for a fairly wide range of collision factors to be recorded. That includes information about road surface conditions, light conditions, weather and carriageway hazards, and also any other contributory factors. We have included some additional information in the paper Pillar 6 for today. However, we currently can't report contributory factors, easy for me to say, because around the extraction challenges with ICT. So we're still working at that, but there is some additional information in the paper today, and we can look to show you that on the crash system if you'd like.
Yeah, always, thank you. And then noted, we now have a date for a more detailed meeting as well with the forensic team, with the skip team as well, which is great. Thank you so much for arranging that. Okay, lovely, thank you. So we're going to move on to item 4. So public questions. We've had a series of questions from members of the public on this occasion, which is again very, very welcome. Just for some clarity, a couple were it sounds a bit brutal, but a couple were rejected because they don't comply with the policy for this meeting. But if I've asked the team to go back and explain why that isn't, and I've got no doubt that various issues we will talk about in any case. So just because they're not necessarily discussed here doesn't mean that they're not discussed in the round between my office and the force. So we'll just run through them in the order in which they appear temporally. So we've got a question from South Norfolk. So, and I'll just read it out in full for the benefit of people in the room and online. So this relates to victim support. So in relation to policing priority, visible and trusted policing, my question is to the Chief Constable of Norfolk Police. Since the appointment of the new Police and Crime Commissioner, i.e. 2nd of May 2024, specifically what steps have been put in place to improve the quality of how police interact with the public and victims of crime, and how is the effect of these steps being measured?
Okay, Commissioner, thank you. I think it's fair to say that that's always been a priority in my time as Chief Constable, and of course I know that as our he said new, but I don't know where we are now, but as our Police and Crime Commissioner, I know it's a priority of yours as well, but it's always been the case. So I don't think the 2nd of May for us was the starting gun of looking at this as an issue. During the meeting itself, ACC Davison will be covering the priority of visible and trusted policing, so we'll give some detail with regards to that in the meeting. But I'll perhaps just cover a few areas. Actually, in the third pillar in the meeting on page 50, we'll be talking about Operation Engage. That's a team that's now permanently funded. That team's sole focus is on providing the best possible service to victims of rape and serious sexual offences. supporting bringing offenders to justice and prevention. And indeed, we're working with the Ministry of Justice by sharing examples of the good work of that team for it to inform national practice and policy. Elsewhere in the papers, we'll be talking about Operation Focus. That relates to antisocial behaviour, hotspot policing. All constabularies were in receipt of some funding earlier on in the year for hotspot policing. Operation Focus is the operations to how we've delivered that additional visibility, and we've been carrying that out throughout the summer. In addition, on the tiller that Julie will talk about later with regards to roads and armed policing, or indeed it might be Simon actually talking about it later, we of course carry out extensive work to try and enhance road safety through visibility on our streets. The question, I think, at its heart focuses upon neighbourhood policing. You'll be aware that in our most recent inspection by Her Majesty's Inspector of the Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service, which was only published last month, the constabulary was graded good for the way it carries out its neighbourhood policing. In terms of the measuring of all of that, we have the National Crime Survey of England and Wales and ONS Public Perception Survey data. I think it's fair to say that that those surveys have a fairly limited sample size, and we do have to treat the results with an element of caution. We'll be touching upon them when we come to Pillar 2. However, we are exploring other ways. Of course, there's a cost, but we are exploring other ways of looking at how we can get a better local survey in place to understand the benefits of the visible work that we are doing in our communities. And that's something that at a point in time we'd like to spend a little bit of time with you on. I think we've discussed it informally a couple of times, but I'd probably like to discuss that in more detail at some point, so we'll to both of our advantages.
No, that sounds good. And then just, it might be worth me just specifying for the benefit of people watching and observing this, just in terms of my part of that question as well, really sits within my policing crime plan, which will be published in spring next year. So as I was explaining at the moment, the policing priorities are set by the current policing crime plan, which was created by my predecessor. So in terms of new steps to improve how the public interacts with public and victims of crime, as we discussed earlier as well, those will come through the commissioning associated with the new plan. So just hopefully that helps to pull those dots up a little bit as well. Okay, thank you. So then the next question is quite a lengthy one, and I have incorporated it because it speaks to the same theme that a number of people have raised with me, not just in this specific location, but in locations across the county. So I just thought it was appropriate to bring it here. So it is quite a lengthy one, but I'll just read it out in full. I'm writing to you as a deeply concerned resident of St Stephen's Square, Norwich, to urgently request your support and intervention in addressing an escalating crisis in our community. Over the past month, more than 50 drug deals have been recorded on camera taking place openly on our small street, which consists of just 23 houses. The frequency, visibility and audacity of these illegal activities have become increasingly alarming, and immediate action is necessary to safeguard our neighbourhood. This growing issue is not only threatening the safety and well-being of residents, but it's also tarnishing the reputation of our local area. The constant presence of criminal activity in broad daylight is fostering a climate of fear and insecurity among families, the elderly and vulnerable individuals. We are particularly concerned that this situation could lead to violence, especially in the light of drug-related murder in Pottergate on the 2nd of August. Despite numerous reports to the authorities, supported by clear video and photographic evidence for illegal drug transactions, there appears to have been insufficient action taken to decisively tackle the problem. As a result, I'm reaching out to you, our elected representative, to ask for your assistance in ensuring that the police take immediate and meaningful steps to confront this issue. The situation in St Stephen's Square must not be allowed to deteriorate further. As residents, we deserve to live in a safe and peaceful environment, free from the fear of criminal activity taking place right outside our homes. We urgently need a coordinated response that will not only stop the immediate threat, but also restore confidence in the local law enforcement and public safety efforts. I sincerely hope you will take up this matter on behalf of the residents and provide the leadership needed to bring about real change. Your involvement could make all the difference in safeguarding our community's well-being. They then just mentioned that they'll attend the SNAP on tomorrow in the area of Vauxhall Street, and then thanks for bringing this attention to the issue. But as I say, I've had a number of people talk to me about this same issue, so not just the specifics in this case, but a wider commentary would be helpful.
Of course, and I'm firstly sorry to hear that that's their experience of living in that area. It cannot be nice for them, and I understand the concern. Firstly, just in terms of the meeting, we will of course have a presence at the meeting tomorrow evening. Our neighbourhood inspector will be there and present. And I think it's fair to say that it's an area that we are aware of the concerns in the area. In fact, earlier in the year, I patrolled the area myself with colleagues and saw some of the challenges that are taking place there. I think it's complex. I think the person who poses the question is right. It requires a coordinated response across agencies, so not just policing, but clearly there's a significant police role to play in this. But there are challenges in the locality that around drug and alcohol, around housing and accommodation, around mental health services that will require those other partners to assist us. Indeed, recently our chief inspector for the area brought many of those agencies together for a bit of a round table after the area had been identified as a priority area at our Safe and Knowledge Board. So what does that mean? A priority area is the place where we focus our patrols and preventative activity because of community concern and or because our data suggests that it merits that approach. Having identified it as a priority area, we've carried out a significant amount of work on the ground. That has included working in partnership with Norwich City Council to obtain several closure orders in respect of problem addresses and vulnerable tenants. That's not action that we take lightly because obviously there's a fear that you're displacing the problem, but nonetheless, when individuals are blighting a community, we will work with the council to apply for multiple closure orders. We've obtained a criminal behaviour order for one of the most problematic individuals who lives on that estate. That now means that individual is not allowed to attend any property owned by the city council in that neighbourhood, and the approach towards that individual, I think, will make a difference given his previous offending behaviour. We've also obtained prevention notices in relation to another individual there. So if you see the ladder of escalation, prevention notice before a behaviour order, but that excluded that individual from the area, and we are looking at escalating that to a criminal behaviour order as well. We are carrying out extensive and regular checks of addresses subject to those closure orders to make sure that those houses stay closed and to make sure that we are enforcing them, and if breaches occur we will enforce against them. We have, with support of partners, seen the installation of additional cameras in locations around there. I won't disclose the locations, albeit they're not covert, but suffice to say we've got additional cameras in the location. We've sought to engage with local groups there, whether it be attending coffee mornings, whether it be through patrols, to speak to local residents. Doing that led to further installation of cameras in an area that was flagged up as particularly problematic for residents. And we continue to work with the City Council to explore further tenancy action against some of the individuals living in that area. Over the summer, we worked with the Targeted Youth Service Support Team to look at additional provisions for young people within that area, albeit there are provision in terms of football type basketball courts in the area, but I think that would benefit from additional supervised support. We continue to work closely with shops and businesses in that area, gather intelligence, and of course carry out patrols. And those patrols, both in uniform and in plain clothes. We put a lot into that area, as much as resource allows. As ever, I would always like to put more resource in, but we absolutely understand the problem. We're very sympathetic towards it and committed to doing what we can with partners to help resolve it.
Okay, thank you. I think already, just as a quick tangential, there's quite a lot coming through in the police and crime plan consultation around organised crime, especially in the engagement days that I've been doing. There's been a lot of commentary around that. So expect we'll have quite a lot more detailed discussion around this point going forward, I think. Yeah.
Commissioner, if I may, because I forgot to mention it in my response. There was reference to the murder in Pottergate on the 2nd of August within the question. That crime remains under investigation. We are pursuing good lines of inquiry. I think we're making good progress. I don't want to give too much more than that, but I'm satisfied with what we are doing. More broadly, there was a second homicide in the city this summer. Individuals have been charged with that homicide in the last few weeks. Therefore, because that's moving towards court, that limits how much I can say on that. But we do recognise the impact that those events have on our communities, and we are really committed to dealing with the things that are causing those incidents.
Yeah. It comes across when I talk to officers in the force as well. So
good.
Thank you. Okay, and then we've got, just moving on to the next question, which relates to so this one relates to gender identity in strip searches. So the correspondent asks, in response to a Freedom of Information request in February 24, Norfolk Constabulary confirmed it was retaining guidance on strip searching detainees that overrides PACE and the Equality Act and prioritises claimed gender identity pending review, thus allowing male officers to search women and girls. How long will this unlawful guidance amounting to state-sanctioned sexual assault be retained? And can you confirm that the review being conducted will respect the protected characteristic of sex and the vulnerability of female detainees?
Yeah, so the Constabulary did adopt the National Police Chiefs Council guidance, which was first published in 2021 regarding searching by trans employees of the police force. However, that guidance has recently been temporarily withdrawn by NPCC. There is a national lead for this issue for policing, which is the Chief Constable of Northumbria Police, Vanessa Jardine, and she has commissioned the review, which includes obtaining the appropriate legal advice and consultation. It's difficult for me to comment what the outcome of that review is going to be. But once it is published, we ourselves will judge the merits of adopting that position. But we are waiting for that review to be completed. In response to the national guidance being temporarily removed from the NPCC website, we are reviewing our local policies for both searches conducted under PACE, so Code A of PACE, so that's the stopping searches that might take place on the street, and also those searches that might occur within the custody environment, that's under Code C of PACE. And our legal services department are engaged in that. Whilst policies do permit the searching of and by individuals who identify as a particular gender, this would very much be based on the specific circumstances presented, including the wishes and objections of those involved, and there being no adverse consequence to that. So the national guidance review is still ongoing, and as such, PCC has not published any revised guidance. We are pushing. Indeed, one of our superintendents recently attended a national event whereby we are pushing for an update on this, because I think forces want some clarity, and we are waiting for that clarity to come from the national review.
So, okay, that's helpful. So in the first part of that question, when they're talking about the FOI response and this the pending review statement, that relates to the NPCC review at a national level, as well as a local. Okay, thank you. So I think from my point of view, with regards to the Code C and the work that happens in relation to detainees, I'm aware of a lot of work that's done by the independent custody visitors that is managed through this office to make sure that detainees are treated with dignity and respect, and that the welfare and well-being of detainees is good. So I will speak with the manager of that independent custody visiting scheme just to understand how those different policies then are manifested in terms of the custody visiting work that's done to check from the other side of things as well. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So then the next question, we got two almost identical questions. There were some differences. So what I've done is I've just sort of composited them, put them together to form one question, which contains all of the component parts of the two questions that were asked. So the sort of composited question reads: in view of the importance of accurate crime data, can you confirm whether Norfolk Constabulary records the immutable biological sex of victims and offenders in line with the Equality Act, unless modified by a gender recognition certificate as per the recent Haldane judgment, rather than the subjective category of gender identity, which has no definition in law? Suffolk and Norfolk Constabulary still let suspects self-describe their gender, not sex, and an option for prefer not to say. Can you reassure myself and the public that the police will not disregard the law and say keep in mind that we record the sex of their suspects? This is an ongoing problem which I feel the police is intent on ignoring.
Thank you. So for the recording of crime, our crime recording system is called Athena, as you know, Commissioner. This has fields for the recording of sex for any involved party, whether that be victim, suspect, offender. And the recording options in that field are male, female, unknown, or unspecified. That's a system that is shared across 9 forces, and so effectively it's a system that we receive and that we are operating within. But for the purposes of crime recording, they are the 4 drop downs. The constabulary cannot ask for gender recognition certificates. It's a protected document, as far as I understand. And we only have any involvement with such a certificate if someone produces it or references it of their own free will. When a person presents themselves into custody, the custody sergeant will record the person's sex, which links to the police national computer report of that individual, if that's someone who's been into custody previously, i.e. if they've got a police national computer record. Again, the sex field gives the same options as that which I went through on crime recording: male, female, unknown, unspecified. When someone books into the custody suite, the custody sergeant will ask that person a number of questions with regarding their welfare, their medical situations. Amongst those questions, it will include their self-defined gender. And of course, a person's gender identity may differ from their sex. We collect both pieces of information to ensure that both gender reassignment and sex information are collected. And again, we can't ask for a gender recognition certificate, and the likelihood of someone having that with them in custody would probably be quite low. We offer guidance. So our sexual orientation and gender custody standing order includes the following, and I'll read it out if I may. It says, in establishing the gender of a detainee, it may be that there is no reason to doubt which gender they identify as. However, where there is doubt, the detainee should be asked discreetly which gender they identify as. Detainees should never be asked if they have a gender recognition certificate. This gender identity should be recorded and signed for on the custody record. There are grounds to doubt that this identification reflects their predominant lifestyle if they are willing to express a gender identity, or if they express a non-binary gender identity. Gender of their predominant lifestyle will dictate how they should be treated in custody. This exercise must not be a subjective judgment of how well the person's appearance and behaviour conforms to their chosen gender role, but an objective assessment of their apparent predominant gender. So that's the guidance which we issue.
Thank you. There's quite a lot, isn't there, in that, touching on not least Athena. And I know you and I have spoken about some of the, I'd say, distinct challenges presented to the force by Athena in its current form. And I think we only just in the last couple of weeks have been talking about what the scoping would look like for the replacement or the next, formal big iteration of that. And everyone on that side of the table and this knows that I have some concerns around the lack of information gathering through Athena on all protected characteristics, actually, and that's that demographic information isn't as perhaps robust as it could be. So I think this just reinforces the need to make sure that that scoping piece of work is done, not just in terms of what's available in the market, which is often what is the starting point for any sort of public service provision, but also what the best kind of outcome would be in terms of getting that data and being able to use that within the force as well, across protected characteristics. So we'll sort of continue those conversations as that Athena replacement discussion continues anyway. It will be really helpful for me to have sight of the MPCC review once that's completed. I think that is pretty critical. And then, as I was saying, I think the work done by the independent custody visitors is really critical here to make sure that that detainees are treated with dignity and respect, as we discussed, and that's across any and all vulnerabilities. And I think the only other sort of component part, which slightly goes unspoken when we're asked this question, is actually in relation to officers as well. So just from a health and safety at work and wellbeing sort of point of view, I just don't want to lose sight of that side of the coin as well. But thank you, that's helpful, I think, to have an understanding of some of the complexities that the current situation presents. That's not, perfect. These things rarely are, but it's helpful to understand the current status of that and what's moving forward in terms of resolving some of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of the public questions that have been asked. We are just use myself slightly here. I think last time I might have forgotten to do a break, so I'm going to try not to forget that on this time. Someone stop me. So we're going to turn to the various sort of papers that have been produced for this. Thank you again to the team for pulling this pulling this together. My goodness, that's a bit Freudian. That's my job. I'm doing the pulling it apart. So if we tend to pillar 1, is it helpful to give a quick sort of review of this?
Yes, so if it works for you, Commissioner, as I did last time, I've allocated pillars to
Yeah.
colleagues on my right. I think they'd be happy to provide a brief overview of their paper, just the highlights, I think, and then take any questions that you might have.
Yeah.
So I think pillar one I allocated to Nick, is that correct? To Peter, sorry. We should have let that run for a bit.
I mean, a very, very succinct overview.
Sorry, Peter, Nick, I apologise. Sorry, Peter.
Commissioner, so the pillar one report is for sustained Norfolk Constabulary. Being circulated and I'm planning to cover all the topics in the report. The main one I wanted to focus on was the finance within it. I'll do that very briefly, not as briefly as Nick put it down, but briefly nonetheless, and highlight some of the issues within there. The report on the pack was dated the 30th of June, was forecasting for the year an overspend of 500,000 for the constabulary, which is about near 2% of the budget. It should be noted that following this report, the payroll for officers and staff has also been announced at 4.75%. And due to the way that that's funded from the Home Office, that's actually going to add another 500,000 to forecast overspend. So that's going to take it up to about £1 million. It's closer to 0.6% budget. The rest of the pressure that's set out in the report is also mainly around pay, additional spending on overtime, the rising through increased training demands and financial year operational demands as well. And I said, coupled with that pay award, 5% is increasing pressure on spending for the constabulary to around. In terms of the capital programme, the budget is 11.4 million, and that is currently on track. That was the main item that I was going to thank you.
Thank you. So the current situation with vast finances is euphemistically less than ideal. I know you're aware that I've raised that with the policing minister in terms of this in-year deficit resulting from the pay uplift. And again, in a similar way to the earlier conversation around just having some consistency in that dialogue. So that is something I'll continue to discuss with the policing minister. So notwithstanding the fact that we've got these additional in-year costs which were unexpected, we've got this deficit. Can you just say something about what steps may be being taken within the force to try and claw back some of this overspend, please?
Okay, so I can set down obviously around officer pay. The options are limited because we've got the requirements under uplift to maintain our uplift numbers, and that coupled with the way the pay award is allocated is really what's significantly tying our hands and adding the pressure to the budget, as over 60% of our spending is on police officers. So we're having to hunt for the savings on the other 40%. So we're looking at, well, we've established a finance goal group the other day for the first time this year, previously one last year as well. And that's looking at all the other types of spending that we can possibly control other than officers. So we're looking at vacancy control within the police staff, how we can tighten those up. Controls on other areas of discretionary spending, so travel allowances and those kind of things. Reviewing the capital programme to see if there's any elements that we can pause or defer, but doing that without damaging operational requirements. But that again will have some limited, but there may well be some capital spending that we can defer. And where we can, we'll also increase the income that's coming in sort of funds. So we do get income from mutual aid, where we respond to operational needs from other forces. also get interest in treasury management activities, but sector organisation, we have to be prudent in terms of how we do that, and security is obviously the most important for our cash, so we can't just invest it to get interest in the commercial. So those are the kinds of activities that we're looking at, but it's really restricted to that kind of 40% isn't a strong one.
And if you don't mind me,
Please, yeah.
Commissioner, we obviously await the budget and the comprehensive spending review that's following at the end of the month. I think everyone in policing recognises that money is tight across government finances. That being said, I think that there is an incredibly strong case for improving the financial resilience of policing. I've often said crime is a tax on the economy. You see the impact it on our high streets. It's not just about our organisation, it's the impact that crime and disorder has in our communities. However, even if funding is fine, which it is, there are other levers that could be pulled that would make a really, really significant difference to the financial viability of this force. Number one is to remove the police uplift target. We find ourselves in this odd situation where we've got police officers who have recently retired, have huge amount of investigative skills, but I have to employ new, young, inexperienced police officers who cost more than if I was to employ those retired officers as police staff to probably do exactly the same thing, and I would have no training requirement. And if that police officer number was removed, whilst it might sound counterintuitive in terms of visibility, I think I would be increasing my visibility because I'd have a reduced training requirement, a reduced turnover, and I would have skilled investigators elsewhere in my force, and it would save a significant amount of money. We know, because of the limitations of our finance, we have people, for example, police officers working in our control room, where I could be employing police staff within that role as well. However, if that cap is not removed, a further mitigation could be that we are counted. Currently, there's a twice yearly census count. It's the number of police officers which determines our funding level. If that was reduced to once yearly, that would allow me some in-year management as to when I bring officers on, and would be incredibly helpful. And then finally, as Peter alluded to, when it comes to pay, the risk is that the CSR again will stick to the principles as set out in the funding formula, whereby pay rises are not, the funding for pay rises is not done by headcount, but it's done by funding formula share. And as long as that persists, Norfolk will be a loser in terms of resource. And those three things could all be done without more money. And I think that's the arena where we're in. I speak to this coming from my national position as well as NPCC lead on finance, but locally, those three levers would make such a difference and be an enabler of everything else that we want to cover within what will be within your policing crime plan.
Yeah, that's understood. Starting to share the frustration.
Over the last 3 years, in terms of the way the pay laws grant comes through from the Home Office, that's put nearly £5 million worth of pressure on Norfolk over those 3 years. So additional savings that we've had to find because we aren't properly funded.
And I think one thing that muddies the waters in terms of discussion or the raising of these points to the Home Office is the disparity in that funding formula with respect to the force outcomes. So because different forces have made different decisions around staffing levels, PCSOs, officer levels, we've got this sort of slightly unhelpful situation whereby we can't anymore compare apples with apples. you know, the differences operationally are so distinct between forces that I think we've got, you know, PCC trying to raise points of principle by using examples. And I think as a result, as the Home Secretary observed, everyone seems to think that they'd be better off without the funding formula, but there will always be some winners and there will always be some losers. So I'm trying to come at this with that understanding, but then looking at the nuts and bolts as you've just articulated. So right, well, even if that stays, which I hope it doesn't in many ways, but even if that stays, what tweaks could be done to just try and get a bit more movement, so it's a bit more respect, you know, sort of representative of the situation on the ground in any given force. So those examples are helpful, and they're largely mirrored by the discussions that have been had so far, but I will continue to sort of I'll continue to raise that, particularly the funding formula versus headcount point. So
And I think the Home Secretary is right. If the quantum doesn't increase, any change will have winners and losers. I suspect that whatever the replacement is, probably one of the biggest factors when it comes to funding will be population growth. It would have to be. And actually, the average population growth across the UK since the last funding formula was last written was in the region of 6%. We're above that in terms of our growth here. But there are real challenges here. That being said, if recognising that the funding formula is such a difficult thing to review, it's a bit like council tax bands, they don't get reviewed because they're so difficult. Recognising that it is, I think on a point of fairness, money is set aside for a pay increase, then that money should be allocated by how many people you employ. And currently, the current mechanism is disadvantaging forces that have made the decision previously to invest in frontline policing. It's favouring those forces that have significant back office infrastructure. And I think there's got to be something wrong with that.
yeah, no, agreed. Okay, thank you. It's a bit of a long one. I'm going to try and just claw back some of the overrun here. So can we just look at, you know, that it's of interest to me in terms of many reasons, not just that everyone wants more visible policing, everyone wants a really thriving force, people want to work in a thriving force as well. So as you know, I am interested in basically well-being and sickness within the force. So I'm just going to pull a few things together and then just lob one big question at you, if you don't mind. So in relation to the establishment and strength and hours lost to sickness, we've got a bit of a plateauing. I know we've got a slight sort of downward trend, but it's fairly sticky around the 4% mark, 4 to 5% mark. I'm curious to know if we've got a sense of the component of that which is long-term sick leave. You know, just a feel for it, because then just moving into the next page, we're talking about the trauma risk management approach, the additional 15 trim practitioners, which sounds excellent to me. There's a question around whether this risk management has a mandatory element to it, or if it's simply an open door when people feel that they need it. You know, that kind of response would be helpful to know that. Just linked in my mind, at least, to that long-term sick leave sort of point, you know, and perhaps sort of long-term sickness there. And then just one particular thing around the trim. There's a bullet point where it talks about specific risk assessments are also conducted for individuals in high vulnerability roles. I could take a guess about what some of those are. But if you could just bring that point to life a little bit, please, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I'll pick up that.
Yeah.
Although specifically not in the data set there. The short-term sicknesses are normally around 2/3 or about 70%, although I can get you specifics. And of course, short-term, quick engagement, supervisors, issues are generally and quickly resolved. We have, as it kind of suggests in the paper, and as you well aware, Commissioner, have invested in our wellbeing provision to make sure that we've got a suite of support, but that's kind of psychology or psychiatry support to help the longer term, and we are clearly seeing a rise of mental health issues. To your point around trim is officer, effectively predominantly officer, but it's not just officers, because we do have members of police staff in traumatic situations, but that's led by the individuals, not least because you wouldn't want to be forcing something into that space, but it's heavily encouraged, and not least it comes from the military following was traumatic. It's a diffuser. It's one of those opportunities where you can talk through, get rid of that concern, talk it through, and deal with it quite quickly. When you talk about specific roles, well, they are the sorts of roles that you would be imagining. Those that are exposed to, for argument's sake, indecent images of children for long protracted periods, but equally we do a lot around them, so they have hours fixed in terms of how long they're being exposed before they're withdrawn as part of their ongoing process. But they will have that, I think it's twice yearly actually, assessment where they're filling an assessment form around how they're feeling. That's then processed, looked at, and then provision is provided should it be needed.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm having increasing conversations around trim processes in general in different sectors. It's fascinating to me about the similarities and then massive divergence in approach. So yeah, I suspect we might keep coming back to this a little bit to understand
I
those.
suppose the point being made in the paper is 15 additional, so we've already got a suite of individuals across the organisation, and it is well embedded. It's not new to us. Trim is not new to us, and it's something that they look at quite quickly following a traumatic exposure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then the last big one on this, alive to the fact that the latest appeal inspection has just come out. Obviously, we've had quite a detailed conversation around that, but I know that things move on quickly when you've got these reports through. So, and you also know that I will be writing to HYC given some inconsistencies from my point of view. I want to understand those better, and I've got some observations on that which I'll be raising for discussion with them. Could you just say something about where your thinking is now on the changes identified and what that means for the force going forward?
Timely question, because yesterday we met with two representatives of the inspectorate to get a debrief following the publication of the report, and try and get from them a sort of wider context as to how they see the force beyond what was contained within it. What I would say is, I think in broad terms, it's a fair report which recognises a constabulary that's working incredibly hard, delivering some great things, but has got a number of pressure points within our service offering. I think those main pressure points are dealing with non-emergency demand in our control room. We find it difficult to answer calls for non-emergency calls at the speed that the inspectorate would like, albeit our average on a non-emergency call is just over 5 minutes. We know that at peak times it can be longer than that, and that's not what we want to provide. The report also identified demand challenges in our safeguarding hub. Again, that's about the volume of referrals that go into that hub. The Norfolk Horizons team will be reviewing that function in the months ahead. One slight challenge for us might be that the inspectorate would like us to be exchanging more information with partners. That works if those partners are ready to receive that increased level of information, and that's something that we would need to discuss with them. There was also observations about resourcing in our child online team, so that's about online child sexual abuse and around the management of sex offenders. the report acknowledges that we fixed those problems in terms of the resource required, but that required a lot of money. I think the thing that we went through the other day was if we were to fully adopt all of the recommendations within the report, we probably add close to another £6 million onto our savings requirement. Particularly once your police and crime plan consultation has ended, we'll be sitting down and working out how we reconfigure the organisation as required to meet priorities and indeed the requirements of the inspectorate. Overall, we're a good police force doing good things, but as demand and pressures and accreditation, things like that go up, and resource and finance doesn't follow, it is a challenge.
Now I just had a couple of points. So the point that the chief makes around prioritisation is worth just referencing or contextualising around call handling, in that our 999 call handling is some of the best in the country, and that's where the predominance of risk sits. If we've got a 101, so to the chief's point around the 5 minutes, we do have a switchboard that triages 101 calls. So if there's a risk in there, and I just want to, for those that potentially will be watching online, that gets identified and thrust quickly into that 999 emergency filter effectively and treated as such. And I suppose the other point I'd make, the chief quite properly identifies the pressures around whether it's accreditation or expectations and whatever else, but some of the factors that the HMI picked up on around ratios, and I'll probably mention that when I come to pillar 4, or numbers of referrals. That's about us not being, I don't want to use the word being kind of damned by our own success, but we know we're processing far more sex offenders, society generally, as is Norfolk. And the more sex offenders you process, the more that they have to be then managed post sentence back in the communities. And you know where our position is around absolutely treating any domestic call very seriously and ensuring that we risk assess what we have in front of us, which creates that almost tidal wave of risk assessments coming in, and we are one of the forces that do those secondary risk assessments to ensure that the first pass is double checked. And of course, by taking those sorts of processes, you create demands into the system that, as the chief's quite rightly identified, need some sort of resource against. And that's an ongoing and continuous challenge for us.
So that tsunami comes across really clearly in these papers, and then from my point of view, the area of interest for me then becomes the MOJ, the Home Office, those kind of things, because a lot of these the additional sort of external pressures which constrain your work collectively are not in anyone's gift around this table to resolve. So and I'm particularly I am very concerned around the victim support, which is very good given everything here, but I am extremely concerned about the attrition of victim support, just because as they proceed through the justice system. I'm looking to you. I mean, you and I have had discussions around this point as well. I am extremely concerned about that, because I can see the work that's happening. I can see that pressure building in the data, yet there's this huge gap over which we have collectively no control at all. So certainly from the spring, that will be receiving an enormous amount of attention on my part to do just really get under the skin of that and see if there's anything at all that can be done, whether it's talking with people who work with perpetrators to reduce reoffending, you know what I mean, like every possible sort of lever really. So I imagine certainly within the LCJB we'll having more specific conversations around that piece as well. That yeah, that is not going sort of unnoticed. I do want to stress that. And it's just making sure that the force is delivering as consistently as possible given those constraints, right? That's the challenge. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I am extremely aware of the time. If I think that the first part took considerable amount of time, longer than was anticipated. Apologies for all. I'm happy to have a quick break now, because I know within the papers they get smaller and smaller as they go through. So if everyone's happy to take a break now, we'll reconvene at 20 past. For about 5 more minutes. So should we move on to pillar 2?
Well, roulette's wheel says this time it is Nick.
I'm prepared.
You prepared this one?
Okay, so Commissioner, just a quick overview. The paper sets out on page 34 the constabulary's position against the latest official National Statistics Crime Survey of England World Public Perception Survey for the last 12 months ending April 2024 for just members of the public. It is based on some 500 residents of Norfolk in terms of the significance of it. So it clearly shows a range rankings that the constabulary has against certain particular question sets in respect of all forces in the country, and that's set out on page 34. Paper then moves on to information with respect to the Professional Standards Department and complaints against the police in the previous 12 months to June 2024. You can see, Commissioner, that during this period of 21% reduction in complaints with 327 recorded. It's also noticeable that there's been an increase in the average number of days taken to resolve a complaint from 86 days to 107 days. The discussions that we've had within the constabulary is that we believe that this is due to the increasing complexity of some of the cases during this period. All officers and staff in PSD work incredibly hard to do what they need to do within the kind of statutory time frames, etc. In terms of engagement, the paper talks about that on page 38, and table 7 sets out activity, and I think overall you can see an increasing amount of activity being recorded in the previous 12 months, which of course is pleasing, particularly in terms of visibility and engagement and accessibility. We then look at page 40, which also talks about the digital channels that the constabulary has, and although it's a small snapshot between April and June of this year, again you can see some modest growth. But overall, the volume of contacts and members of the public that engage with the constabulary, I think, is quite impressive. Page 41, moving to table 10, shows the CCR, the constabulary's control room, and front line in respect to answering calls for service and responding to incidents. Strong performance, I think, Commissioner, in respect to 999 call answerings, 4 seconds in terms of the data set. That's clearly commented on in the latest HMIC FRS field inspection 2 as a strength. Also, you can see in the paper, Commissioner, public accessing us digitally by alternative channels to the telephone, whether it's single online home, live chat, emails, as an effective way to interact with the constabulary in terms of us giving the public choice continues to grow. Some 65,000 recorded contacts in 12 months up to June 2024. And as a late adopter to single online home, we just continue to expect that to substantially expand and grow if it follows the models and kind of experiences of other forces that have had it now for 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So that's good. Gives us lots of opportunities and public too. And then, of course, finally, the last bit of the paper sets out some local and national kind of press and media campaigns, which is there to see.
Thank you. Yeah, we had good discussion at the last time around complaints and timeframes to complete that, which was very helpful. Just one small point, and I apologise for not raising this in advance. I actually wrote the email and then failed to hit send, so apologies. Can we just check in table 5? In the,
pages, sorry,
well, fascinatingly, there are no page numbers on the first one, first table.
Page 35, I think,
Thank
Nick.
you. Thank you very much. Yeah, because I'm a bit old school using paper rather than a PDF. So on the PSD data complaints in the last 12 months, we've got 327 there. Then if I'm reading this correctly, the first bullet point on the next page, it says in 84 of the 377 complaint cases, Do you happen to know off the top of your head which of those numbers is correct? Because obviously one is just a simple FIFO, and I apologise for not raising this. It's actually not like mission critical, but
I can find that out because PSD's part of mine.
yeah.
I'd rather than kind of, I think it's
No, don't.
lower, but I want to be absolutely sure. I mean, we have seen an uptick clearly in terms of we want to know, and we've open to people helping us understand the service we're giving, but I can find that out for you.
Yeah, thank you. Again, it doesn't detract from the overall story that's being told here. So, do you know what I mean? It's not, you know, my questions aren't sort of contingent on it, but just for completeness, that would be helpful. Thank you. So what, let me just have a quick, as we talked about the local survey, and we're going to pick that up separately, which is great. I'm keen to look at that. And I'm also just, as a quick sort of aside, it was nice to see the work that's being looked at with respect to the impact of shoplifting with a similar sort of survey within your side. So, but on this point in particular, with regards to complaints which are upheld, have we got, is there any work being done to identify trends at all, whether it's locational, behavioural, people involved, teams involved? How are lessons being learned? You know, how are they being identified? And then how is that lessons learned sort of feedback loop being incorporated? And then as a second part, sort of distinct part, is there and how is, if it's happening, remedial action being taken with individuals identified through that complaints process, just to strengthen provisions going forward?
So it might be a bit of a double edged between myself and the Deputy Chief Constable as the depth portfolio. But I mean, the paper itself talks about the prevention work and the prevent officer. So the constabulary is working through some dashboard management information, which basically combines a whole load of data sets to actually look to see if we can identify trends and hotspots, including individuals that might need further support in terms of helping them with their practice. That in combination, once that comes online with the prevent approach that the Professional Standards Department takes, and the prevent officer will go out, will speak with teams, departments, look to work with individuals that might need further support in terms of their practice and their approach, which is perhaps seeing them a bit more visible in terms of public complaints. And you know, that's the core way in which we're going to seek to improve, to learn the lessons, to look for the trends, to feed that in. So that core understanding centered around PSD can then link into the L&D department. So actually we can look to see if we need to change and adapt any of the self-defence training, if we need to change and adapt any of the initial training for student officers, and so on and so forth, as we get to see what those trends are. So I think at the core and the hub of it will be that use of the data, multi-layered, enable us to get to kind of some more laser kind of understanding about where the issues are, and then that dedicated resource taking that forward and working with whatever part of the organisation or individuals that we need to do so. Probably is the hub of our response in terms of lessons learned, ultimately to drive down, you know, complaints by the public that then have an outcome which is a finding in favour of complaint being upheld because the officer's behaviour, whether it be staff members' behaviour or practice, wasn't at the required level. I don't know if there's anything further to add into that.
No, I don't think I can have anything further. I think we're across that. We're looking as Nick says, ensuring that we adapt and respond as we get particular lessons learned. Forgive me, my phone keeps going.
It's fine. If you need, then feel free. Yeah,
Some calls.
no, that's appreciated. So just so Nick, can we just get into this a little bit, because so the Power BI work that's being done, have you got timeframes for that in terms of that being online? There's timeframes to think.
Have the answer to the details, which is exit in the room.
Okay, all right. So depending on whether he returns, I'll certainly pick that up. Okay. So the thing that this question is really coming from, because with the engagement work that I've been doing, I've had a surprising number of people as a proportion, right, take time out of their day and come to me furnished with emails and letters and that kind of thing. And not in a particularly sort of, not in a negative sense, they just want to share their experience. And so my perspective with this, within this highly skewed self-selecting data set, right, is one where it's not immediately clear to me what, if any, remedial action is being taken either for the complainant or within that bit of the force. And I appreciate this is difficult because it's vague, because I'm not offering up examples. But it's interesting to me to know in advance of that Power BI work being done, how that feedback loop is being.
So, I mean, I
does
guess
that make a little bit more like in a supervisory sense or that kind of thing?
Okay, so I mean, like, notwithstanding whether it's 377 or 327 and the 22% which were upheld.
Yeah.
The drill down into that is 34 of those were police action following contact, 12 were general levels of service in terms of timeliness and communication, 10 were custody matters, 9 were information providing to victims and interested parties, which sounds very similar to some of the mail and the correspondence you just articulated. So the way in which the complaints process works, it's focused on, in the first instance, about lessons learned and what can we do to improve service and the service offered by individuals. If you get to misconduct, then that's the step forward. And as part of that, actually, you engage with the individual that's making complaint, you understand what the issues are, you make sure that there isn't any misconduct in it, and it's actually more about lessons learned. You kind of agree the outcome with that. And then actually the officer, either through their frontline first report supervisor or through a more senior manager or maybe even PSD, depending on what the issue is, do in fact feedback the issues to the officer with a view to understanding what we need to do to correct that approach for future behaviours and or practice. If that person needs any learning or training or support, we can get access to that. So that is the feedback mechanism that ongoing is part of actually the way in which we deal with public complaints, and it's all set out within the framework that we have to adhere to nationally. So that goes on all the time as a matter of course. The dashboard and the prevent role that comes in at the top of that, I would argue, is an enhancement and an augmentation of the existing framework to strengthen it even more.
So we just, as you exited, I was just asking around the timeframes for the Power BI dashboards for the work that's being done there. You got a sense when they'll be online?
Well, it's part. I don't want to kind of repeat what Nick has said, and I don't really give it.
Oh no, he deferred completely to you. Yeah.
Just on the timeline, when the dashboard is available.
No, I don't have a definitive, but we're using Power BI and we're getting more familiar with Power BI, and it's as described gives, and I'm sure this is what Nick was saying, gives us the ability and the insight to overlay different databases to ensure that we can start seeing either trends, individuals, as you've got already said, teams, locations, and then use that in a more insightful way to help us in terms of the preventative work. But I'm sure, forgive me for stepping out, it was a national test or something.
You're fine, that's it.
That I'm sure Nick's already just described that to you.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, there's just, because the description is written in the future tense, do you see what I mean? So I'm just keen to understand.
Yeah, we've looked at ways of, you know, this is where we think the most, and using language of insight, the most insight will come from. We have tried a number of ways of doing this, but when you've got, I suppose, disparate or disconnected information sets, it becomes quite laborious to do the overlay. And actually, things like Power BI, there are other things that we're doing regionally around with academia to see whether there are areas that can help us be part of that predictive, because most of this actually is trying to prevent people stepping towards a cliff edge or even stepping over the cliff edge. Actually, most people don't want to get there, and so around good leadership, understanding what the precursor behaviours look like, and take action to stop them becoming sinister or more significant.
Commission, if I may, I mean, as 377 complaints or 327 complaints that were deemed to be the service was unacceptable. I mean, that's got to be seen in the context of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of interactions that our officers and staff have every year with members of the public where it's recognised that actually the contact and the service given was spot on, as validated by HMIC peer inspection in terms of some of the testing that they did. And even those 22% that where it was seen to be the service was unacceptable, none of those went on to issues where there needed to be a misconduct meeting or a misconduct hearing. They're all eminently locally resolvable in terms of lessons learned and apology and some learning and development for the individual concerned.
I think all of this, all of that is completely, a legitimate kind of observation, and I'm not going to take away anything from that. My observation is that there has rightly been such a lot of focus on the big red flags around misconduct that again, looking at this very skewed, highly self-selecting sort of data set, but I'm getting it from a lot of different sort of quarters, is that a perceived lack of attention. I'm going to just carefully frame it as that, because I don't think it actually is an absence. I'm just trying to join the dots here on the little stuff. It's often that more day-to-day experience which can then undermine the public's or an individual's relationship with the police, and it's that is coming through. So I completely accept, as you might expect, given my former professional work, people are fallible, absolutely, mistakes will be made. It's about how that position is recovered, how the member of the public is taken through that process as well. And my observations around the complaints processes, it's just this enormous black box which is impenetrable to a person that doesn't work within the sector. But I think also because there's a very high level of confidence in the police in Norfolk, I think that does come through, but it also means that when things don't go right, it feels bad, because it is bad, but it feels, do you know what I mean? It's a stark contrast.
There's some academic work talking about the asymmetry of police contact. You need a huge amount of positives to get a small uptick, and it only takes, as you described, one or two that feel less than acceptable to get a huge downward feel about the service. So we're very, very keen, whether it's a complaint or what we call an outside of Schedule 3, around that service delivery. Because some of it is just service delivery, service recovery into delivery, as much as it is complaints. And we are, though, to be fair, we do have this wraparound of police regulation, and professional standards do work within a regulatory framework that does sometimes feel like that black box and does create, a process that takes time for us to work through to ensure that we don't miss things, to ensure that when there are sinister and damaging things, that we pick up on them and deal with them appropriately.
So, I'd just say, so I think your question is absolutely right. And the Power BI product that's talked about within here doesn't solve that. What this does is fill a gap that I think we've had for a while, which is for professional standards department to look at more than just the data that they hold. It's what else we hold within the system as perhaps indicators of what might occur. However, on the service quality element, the significant work that we'll be doing in Ralph's team around improving our management information around how investigations progress will be the things that will stop those cases from running on for too long. And that is based on Power BI. More than happy to show that to you at any time. But for example, it will look at an officer's workload. It will identify which of those crimes have just been hanging around for too long and cause those managers to get intrusive at that point, pre the complaint coming in. And I really don't like it when we don't provide the service that victims of crime would want. And so it's in those areas that we're getting more intrusive in the right way, getting more intrusive and wanting to understand where we're getting close to service quality, not meeting standards before it gets to that point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that sounds like a good conversation to have. I think I'm keen for us to spend a bit of time on this because with the various roles around victims and the public in general, I think it's important that I really understand the detail of this so that then I can be an appropriately informed voice coming not only to you, but also to the public. So yeah, that would be great. Could I trouble you, please, at risk of creating more work for you? Could you just find, I'm interested in that asymmetry on the police contact. If you could just send, not chapter and verse, but a short, I don't know, somewhere there exists some sort of literature review or something of that order, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, great. So, yeah, I think we can look forward to more of that. So, yeah, so as an action then, Rob, should we arrange a specific meeting to go through that piece as well? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so then I think that that deals with an awful lot of content within here. I think my only other point is around the engagement within the communities. I'm interested to know about the app that is being used to pick this up, the work that is needed just to make some of that reporting a bit more perhaps reliable. I just note the degree of choice in terms of how officers are selecting categories. I'm curious to know a couple of things. One around if you could just bring to life a little bit of the crime prevention indicator, just what that might look like as a, you know, those engagement activities would be helpful just to bring that to life a little bit. But also just to get your thoughts on to what extent double counting might be within these numbers, because my reading of it would suggest that these are not mutually exclusive categories. So are officers or people just selecting one, or are they selecting multiple per engagement, just to help me understand the data?
So what would I say? I would say that we've got the technology that we've got at the time, and it is subjective. So I think it would be fair to say it's down to officer interpretation about whether they put it down under part walk talk, or whether they put it down as some other form of engagement, depending on how they perceive about it. And of course, the more drop down choices you give somebody without appropriate guidance that they can recite in their head, you're going to get that double counting and subjective interpretation. So I think that would be the first observation to say that's fair. Crime prevention, well, it could be from, you know, I noticed that the windows were open in your house, Mr. Smith, you know, there's burglaries in the area. Have you thought about that? Can I put you in contact with a crime prevention officer for a survey of your home? In terms of situation crime awareness as they go about their engagement day to day, through to the call taker on the line with a member of the public giving some initial primary crime prevention advice online, through to more specific bespoke surveying done by trained crime prevention officers booked by an appointment for whatever that is at whatever locality, and then the events that we have where we will do, you know, bicycle marking activities outside the forum in Norwich or in Kings Lynn or in Great Yarmouth around a range of issues. So I think those would perhaps provide some descriptors of the type of crime prevention activity as a full range, and much more beside that. I think for the future, I would observe two things really. First is the work that we're doing to augment the crime survey of England and Wales and replace what was once a local survey that we have. We were pursuing the Echo product that is Hertfordshire Police had. We've latterly actually found a survey that can deliver all of that, if not more, and it's already on our ICT platform, so very little extra cost. And the constabulary has made a decision to pursue that. It's in the MTFB for some funding in respect to that. We're working through now the project management arrangements, and we're going to start to see if Smart Survey is actually a local product that we can use. That will enable us to much more target locally the communities to get some feedback about policing, and then use that as the evidence base. Local districts will be able to use that and place that on neighbourhood surveys that will give the opportunity to check local priorities, link that in at district levels as well as small community levels on thematic things that are going on, such as what we've heard from a member of the public with St Stephen's Square, for example. So we're quite excited about that recent kind of decision around that particular product. And then the other area that we're going into is a project that I chair in terms of the board around visibility and the use of GPS opportunities, that we're working through the technical aspects of the technology to see if we can actually then be able to really understand live time where our staff are at any one time in the organisation and the county, to demonstrate to the public just how much they are out and about. To also then actually think about some of our own processes and where the bottlenecks are, to be able to then fix that, to actually make them even more accessible to the front line, because we've streamlined a process where we now identify that they're spending an inordinate amount of time because of a particular process internally. So I think they're both quite exciting developments that will take us considerably forward the data set that we've got that's represented in that table.
Okay, that's really good to hear a bit more on that. So just on my, sorry to labour the point, Nick, but just so I'm clear. So the app that they're using at the moment, can they select multiple indicators per one? Okay, so bike marking could be ticked as both a public event engagement and a crime prevention engagement. Okay, fine. Thank you. I think that, just double check. I think that probably deals with the most. Yeah, the others I can pick up. Thank you. We move on to pillar 3.
Catch up.
There we go.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so pillar 3 paper, tackling crime. So page 49, table 11 sets out the performance metrics in respect to domestic abuse and the rape and serious sexual offences up to June 2024. The Constabulary continues its work to strengthen our services to victims of domestic abuse, rape and serious sexual offences. Op Engage, which the Chief has already alluded to in one of the public questions, again, permanently funded. We're working with the Ministry of Justice to share and highlight good practice in respect to our Op Engage programme locally to assist in national policy formation and practice. So we're very pleased by that interest from MOJ. We have completed the move to a single force IOM scheme, integrated offender management scheme, following the creation of the county probation service. They decoupled from Suffolk, now back to the county boundary. So we've obviously adapted the IOM scheme accordingly in partnership to make sure that that works and is coherent. We are setting out further training to frontline staff this autumn in respect to the College of Policing rape and serious sexual offence first responders training package, and the National DA Matters training package, which was supported by central government funding, and that kicks off with our frontline staff in a programme between this month and through into next summer, in terms of how we can balance needing to have them out on the front line doing the job and receiving support and training development. So further investments in terms of strengthening our workforce's ability to understand and respond to the needs of the particularly distressing forms of offending that we see in the county. On pages 51, 50 and 52, the tables indicate our work in respect to tackling serious and organised crime. I note your comment about the public picking up on organised crime groups, and this paper sets out some information in respect to that. We've certainly been strengthening our approach to disruption and the recording of, quite frankly, excellent work officers and staff have been undertaking against organised criminality. There's examples in the paper in respect to police enforcement operations on page 52 and some of the results achieved there, whether it's op content, Monday, Ventura, or Forte. So if I could, Commissioner, highlight you and the public to some of the results in respect to those, some really, really strong results there. Dedicated officers and staff. 53, page 53, again, continues to highlight the focus that we have on tackling county lines drug dealing in the county. We've got a long-standing commitment to dealing with this particular form of drug supply and drug dealing due to its highly exploitative approach and impact on our communities and vulnerable people as a particular business model. And the paper sets out our approach and some of the strong results that we've achieved over the time that we've been focusing on there. And again, Commissioner, I commend you and the public to some of those results that we've achieved. But look, things never stand still, and we're having to respond to the increasing threat that we're starting to see from Mrs. these being synthetic opioids. Just to put some context around here, these are some drugs that are synthetic drugs that are some 100 times stronger than fentanyl. And if you Google fentanyl, a thimbleful can kill 10,000 people if given in a particular way. So you can imagine how dangerous that form of development in the drugs market is. And here again, we work in partnership with the Norfolk Drug and Alcohol Partnership and have developed a rapid response to any report that we get in the county around synthetic opioids. It links into the pump priming that government gave us under ADA a few years ago. Sadly, that funding is coming to an end next March. It's a real challenge to keep that going. Constabulary is working hard to see if it can. It is under threat, which is a shame. And then finally, the paper comments on some of our approaches in respect to agricultural planning, particularly the work under Galileo, which is air forcing, and Operanda, which is our rural farm strategy and approach to agriculture.
Okay, thank you. It is that section around the work around audit, content, Venturi and Forte are really impressive. There's a lot of really, that's pretty mind blowing, the kind of work that's being done there. But I can also see from the charts just how infinite this work is. So it must feel like you're, absolute hamster wheel of work.
Well, it links back to the public's comments about St Stephen's and the challenges there, and the commitment that the constabulary's got to actually try and tackle that. But it is quite endemic.
Yeah, I think that comes across pretty clearly, sadly, just in terms of the data. So a few sort of questions on this. I just wondered if, in respect to the very first table 11 around DA and rape and serious sexual offences, have you got a sense of the quantum of repeat victim reporting?
I haven't off the top of my head, but Commissioner, if with your consent, I can provide you with a written update in respect to
that. Would be very helpful. Yeah, thank you. I'm interested to understand both actually through discussions with Chief and observations through that appeal kind of process. I'm interested to understand the degree of reporting up and down the risk kind of ratings, but also with respect to just in general that repeat victim reporting. The kind of the other side of the coin of this question to me is the effect on the force in terms of the response, the continued perhaps response to DA or sexual violence calls, and how operationally the kind of speaking to human nature, how the consequences around fatigue on calls, particularly if you're dealing with or you've got a young inexperienced team, how that sort of works through as well, because they're two sides to the same issue, aren't they? And again, perhaps not one for right now, but just to share with you why some of these questions being asked is because I'm looking at it through that kind of lens.
Yeah, I think so. Would be happy to provide that. I think if I may, particularly for the rape and serious sexual offences, I think it would be helpful if we included in that action, it's me having due action, but the how many of the percentage of those cases that hit the definition of non-recent.
Yeah.
So because I think it's helpful to understand the quantum. It's not to say one's more important than the other, but just in terms of painting the picture of the challenges.
Yeah.
And then some of the repeat victimisation, I guess it's how much after the first event the next event is. We just need to probably give some thought as to how we present that in the best way. But I know I think I understand the particular bit you're interested in terms of the impact that has on officers who are in regular contact with
that's right.
the same people.
And because the effect on them also there's a reciprocity in this in terms of that victim care, isn't there? And the quality with a little Q of that kind of response and how that's dealt with. So yeah, the data exists and it is a relatively simple exercise to pull that together. I'd be grateful, even just as a single snapshot of in time, that would be.
And Commissioner, I think what we'll seek to do is describe to you how we recognise the issue that you've just raised and where it sits in terms of the oversight and the management information. You know, so in the forecasting coordinating group meeting that I chair, we have dedicated slides on the highest harm, victim, location and perpetrator as it relates to rape and serious sexual offences and domestic abuse offences. So we can see where there's repeat victims and I as the force lead and others get to challenge that and say, well, how are we working with that individual to manage what the issues are in respect to that. Many of the repeats in respect to rape and serious sexual offences are actually children who go missing and are under the age of 18. So of course it's in their head it's a consensual act, but of course in the law, the way we deal with it, no, it's not. It's rape, and therefore you see a number of young people who go frequently missing, who actually are the individuals that then come out to be the repeats because of the way in which we record the crime, and then the work we do to try and support them, deal with the issues about the adults that are exploiting them, is really quite extensive. So we can provide you with hopefully some reassuring information about that. So,
and I've just been rapidly typing away, so I had something in my mind. The Inspector of Constabulary recently published a report on a thematic report, so not one about Norfolk, but thematic around the policing of rape and serious sexual offences. One of the recommendations from that report is that by the 31st of January 25, the College of Policing plus the Victims Commissioner plus PCC should agree a common definition as to what a repeat rape victim is. And I think that will be the problem with the data which we share to you, in that at the moment there is not a common definition or a common definition of repeat victim across any form of criminality. So nationally that looks like it is being picked up, and we'll just have to define it in the information that we give to you as best we can.
Of course.
But you know, what gap, what's the gap is, I think, is the main challenge, but it's something that's picked up nationally, so we'll just have to see what we can.
Thank you. And I think just, you know, this is a bringing to life exercise rather than some sort of next level scrutiny point, if you see what I mean. So I'm completely, you know, content with that approach, and as long as there's clarity, then that serves the purpose well. Thank you. I think that was my bit. Right, just got a couple of questions on opioids. Could we just, I'm glad you mentioned the nitazines. Can you just say something about the current threat level of those and around any sort of specific partnership actions that you're involved in currently to address that?
of course, so the national threat level in respect to nitazines is recognised as a significant threat to drug users. There's a global picture in respect to these synthetic opioids. It's believed that the vast majority are being produced in China, and the prevalence is spreading across the globe. You may see in terms of news and Google searches, etc., what's going on in America, and the deaths that they're having on a daily basis in respect to them. So it's spreading globally in terms of the world. So they can be used to adulterate other drug types. So users don't normally know that these opioids are actually in the drug. They're adulterated because it's poor quality drugs, and they're trying to give a hit so they can kind of sell more of those drugs and increase their profit margins, I guess, is the way in which they do it. So the National Crime Institute runs a series of meetings referred to as Project House Builder. We are represented at that in terms of Norfolk Constabulary, so we get on top of what's coming in nationally, and that forum shares current information and good practice for managing the threats posed by these nitazines. In the last year, over 300 deaths have been linked to these nitazines in the United Kingdom. Locally in Norfolk, we've got laboratory testing on drugs or remnants of drugs found at the scenes of suspected drugs deaths. And so far, we've identified 3 cases where the synthetic opioids have been present. So there are likely to be more, but they've not yet either been identified because there's a backlog in the labs, or there just wasn't the evidence there available when they did do the test. But certainly locally, 3 been identified as being linked to those. The last year, there have been a small number of further examples where these listazines have been identified from targeted testing of drugs when we do drug warrants, enforcement work and intelligence, where we think there's a supply link to either a fatal or a non-fatal overdose. So we're doing that proactive work to understand the picture with partners. We work closely, as I said, with the Norfolk Drug and Alcohol Partnership related deaths panel to understand these issues. That operates an effective multi-agency response to the threat here in Norfolk. We do have a synthetic opioids response plan amongst the partnerships, and that's coordinated by the NDAT manager at this moment in time. Each agency kind of inputs into that, and we continue to evolve that response as we understand from the NCA what's going on nationally, and as we understand from our own work what we're doing locally, so we can continuing to learn. So we share information with East Anglian Ambulance Service, the local hospitals, the drug treatment provider, chains that grow here in Norfolk, and that enables us to be scientific very early on what's going on in terms of their experiences as they work with or respond to drug users in terms of the patterns of behaviours here in Norfolk. An example, last August, we had 4 very quick instances in the space of 1 week where we had 4 near fatalities, but for the ambulance service in particular, using the drugs that reverses this, which is naloxone.
Yeah.
We very quickly identified that, working with the ambulance service and Changelink Grow. Within 48 hours, we'd identified the county lines that was dealing with it, previously unknown to us. Working with the Met, we targeted this line holder in London. We recovered the batch, took the bad batch off the streets of Norfolk, brought the offenders to justice. So some real live examples of how the partnership working locally is second to none in terms of managing the threat as it continues to grow in Norfolk, which inevitably, sadly, it's likely to do.
So just on naloxone, how widely carried is that by officers?
So there's about 200 Norfolk police officers at the moment who voluntarily agreed to carry naloxone, and that's managed by the L&D in terms of the policy. We've got our own specialist kind of qualified medic who keeps us in line with what we need to do in terms of training support and all of the regulations around carrying medicine. It's about 200.
Okay. Do you think that there would be an appropriate sort of review on that, given, because what I understand it to be extremely effective in those sort of acute periods, and discussions that I've been having recently around drug driving, this is where, this is what started it, is around, because it is such a powerful kind of antidote, creating that window of opportunity for recovery with the wider sort of blue lights response. I'm curious to know to what degree it's used, and then to what degree there's some sort of assessment around whether there is almost a public health need for greater sort of availability of it within officers in the force.
So I think we did a light touch review a little while ago, which I'll draw back into the memory of my mind and see if I can get that for you.
That would be great.
In respect to that, I mean, in terms of public health, clearly our memberships through the ICB may well be a forum in respect to that. We know that all the ambulances carry it, don't we? We know it's available in, I suspect, GP surgeries as well as the A&E department. So I think there's a growth out there in terms of availability.
Yeah.
That's got to be seen from a policing perspective in conjunction with the Police Federation's position on this, which is not to support police officers carrying it.
Yeah, so I know that the policing minister has written to encourage further trials. So we're in a strange sort of limbo at the moment, whereby one is saying not to, and then the other is saying, well, actually, there is probably good cause to advocate for greater. And I think my thinking on this, which is absolutely work in progress and yet to be informed by sort of further information from yourselves and from others sort of nationally, is that whilst it may not be it just isn't an ideal situation, but given response delays to ambulance times and that kind of thing, it just calls into question for me whether there is a need to up up the kind of availability of it here within the force, because as you know, often officers are the first people on the scene. You've got to deal with stuff which you
So I
you
mean,
know,
I,
which may not necessarily be.
yeah, I mean, I'll give you my personal view,
Please.
which is I understand the point that you're making. I think we've already tried to explore being able to increase the uptake with the voluntary nature of it within the current framework, and we've got to the level that we've got to. I mean, we're very lucky because we got it because we were the Opanda,
Yes.
one of 4 places in the UK, and it was driven by our then superintendent in charge of Opanda. That's how Norfolk comes to have it over and above a number of other forces. But within the framework that we've got and the position of staff support associations that we have, we've probably taken it to the best level we can do at the moment. I think then there's the whole debate about, whilst we are a system, we should all work together to save life, and we've got positive duties. Who's responsible for what? And then you start to then discuss parallels with right care and right person. So I think I agree. It sounds as though it's the best thing to do in behalf of the communities, but I think there's a bit to unpick. Happy to unpick it.
Yeah, and like I said, this is all work in progress stuff, and please do not read this as me somehow unilaterally making a mad decision that this is what's needed. These are my observations based on sort of discussions, not least as I say that letter coming from the police minister. But it just, it's a really, well, I think Nick used the word around it being endemic in general. So just I'm bringing that understanding to the conversation really, I think. But be good to pick that up in more detail as well going forward.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that then that's everything on pillar 3 for me. Move on to pillar 4. Who's got this one?
I'm picking.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the richness of the debate around it, but I'm also conscious of the time. So if it helps you as chair, I'll be very, very quick.
Yeah.
I just want to raise, I suppose, 3 distinct points and then open it to questions. Within the preventing offender paper, we reference the Norfolk Integrated Offender Management Scheme, and as you well know, that's now back within the fold of Norfolk Stabulary, primarily because we feel that actually aligning that to some of the other offender management teams allows that growth of skills, but also that understanding of and movement of people within Norfolk. And as the paper shows, that we're seeing some benefits doing that, and therefore we think that's the right thing to do. The second point I think I want to raise very briefly, I'm just going to go to my proper note here, is to just mention, I mentioned it earlier, but on page, I think it's page 67, it mentions the Public Protection Unit. Public Protection Unit, as a consequence of the service and UK policing, more specifically, being far more focused on sex offending and prosecution of sex offenders, clearly post-sentence, as I mentioned before, that we have a responsibility, policing in conjunction with probation have a responsibility to manage sex offenders in the community. And as you well know, and some of the things that you'll see in the papers almost weekly, the numbers of image offences and the response to that, and the way that prisons are clearly taking on people as well as post sentence, means that we've had to absorb ever increasing numbers of dangerous offenders, sex offenders particularly. And I think I just want to say, which is a point that we raised right at the beginning of the meeting, that we've now put more resources into a Public Protection Unit, which means we've got some of the lowest ratios of sex offenders to officers and staff than we've had for a long time, which means that, of course, we're addressing that. It's another pressure on us in the system.
Yeah.
And then I think the third point I just want to make is our appropriate use of out-of-court disposals, that the kind of community response to stuff and conditional cautions, and the way that we're both using them appropriately as a diversion away from courts. We've talked about the court backlogs, but actually for and clearly with the consent of the victim, but also the perpetrator, and the right balance both in terms of pressure into the system, that an out of court disposal can be a more effective way of diverting individuals away from the courts and continuing their criminal progression, of which that's linked quite properly to a restorative justice approach that we offer, and we have some great successes around our restorative justice approach. Forgive me for my brevity, but I am conscious of time. But there were 3 points I wanted.
Everyone's sort of afraid that. So again, I've got 2 questions on this one. The first one is in relation to table 16, which I think is the first table. This is around working partnerships to safeguard vulnerable adults and children. I'm conscious of the discussions that we've had already around capacity within the MASH, the kind of difference of partnerships arrangements that we've sort of discussed already.
Yeah.
But could you just talk through basically the child protection strategy discussions, bring to light, just talk us through this table a little bit with respect to that, and in particular the observation around the potential, or the lack of overuse of strategy discussions. I realise that doesn't make sense grammatically. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Second paragraph down, there is nothing to suggest overuse of strategy discussions in Norfolk. Just for you to understand what would that look like, what would the concern be, and then does that make sense?
Partially, and if my answer doesn't make sense, then
We'll get to
clearly
it.
I haven't got another question.
I think I need another custard crew.
I probably do in terms of right. So child section 47 statutory sort of responsibility between us and children's social care. That if there's concern or an ongoing criminal investigation, that clearly with crimes more generally, the way you deal with crimes through a criminal justice outcome, but there might be crimes involving children, that being victims, but their protection of a victim may well better be addressed through a coming together of children's social care and us. We still may pursue the criminal investigation, but there's a balance, because actually at the heart of an investigation such as this is the child. So in terms of making sure that we use section 47 strategy discussion point there, we note that there's no current concern. We think we're doing the right sorts of thing. Nick has a really good, on effectively the constabulary's behalf, a very good relationship with the Director of Social Care, and therefore we ensure that when we do engage, we engage with the right trained individuals on our side. The meetings are well noted, and appropriate actions are captured and then followed through and then followed up. I don't know whether you want to add anything further, because I know your relationship with children's social care is very strong, actually.
Look, we're currently internally, in terms of the pig inspection, particularly the domestic abuse element of that multi-agency safeguarding hub that we have in Norfolk, undertaking some review there. The Norfolk Children's Safeguarding Board arrangements, we've agreed that we want to review Norfolk's MASH, because we haven't done it for a while. And post-COVID and post-modern working, there's some work to be done there. At the moment, they're all on floor 4 in Norfolk County Council. That's where our MASH is. That links in with the CAD service that is Norfolk Children's Services. We've got a really good, strong relationship with strategic and tactical staff between Norfolk Constabulary and Norfolk Children's Services. That works really well. We've got independent scrutineers that come in and look at the processes, look at the section 17 child in need, section 47 child at risk of harm processes that we've got, and give confidence to me and to the Director of Children's Services that our staff are doing what they should be doing in line with the legislation. So when it talks about appropriate levels, we've got some confidence in that through the partnership scrutiny work that we do through the Safeguarding Board. Where we really need to strengthen is to bring more health into the MASH, bring more adult social care into the MASH, bring education into the MASH, to really strengthen that complete picture of risk and make it really easy to get that complete picture of risk, rather than having to kind of wait for people to be able to kind of provide it in, which then causes delay. So I think that's the strengthening work that the partnership is ongoing with. In terms of the formal statutory duties that the Director of Children's Care has got around section 12, section 47, section 17, that's heavily scrutinised,
Mm.
both by our own internal auditors, but also by Ofsted
Mm.
and all the other inspectorates that we've got in respect to that. So that's pretty strong and works really, really well. I mean, we've got, and I can share with you the audit work that we did last week, and we had a big multi-agency meeting around it on Friday. Our staff are working incredibly hard on children, whether it's in the child abuse investigation team, working alongside social workers, undertaking the assessments. DS is in the match doing back to back, section 17, section 47 child protection conferences to make sure that we get that right. So I've got a lot of confidence around that, and actually I can share some of the independent auditing that we've been doing with you, so you can kind of see what's going on, if that's helpful.
I think it'd be good to delay that slightly, and then because we're looking at basically looking at things in a slightly more deep dive approach, and I suspect this might be a useful area to look at just because of the partnership working that happens out of this office as well. I think we can get more out of it by just bringing a few more voices into that conversation, Nick, but thank you.
Yeah.
That's helpful. And then the other question I have in relation to the RJ work. So I'm sort of mindful of the fact that the victim was within that sort of dialogue as well. Do you have many incidences of victims changing their minds, of trying to withdraw from that by wanting something more sort of punitive, that kind of thing? Or do you find the buy-in to be sort of consistent?
Well, of course, going through restorative justice, it is a bit of a journey.
Mm.
But as long as we ensure, and this is why we have the hub with some really well-trained individuals who know what they're doing, as long as we explain what it is and what we're likely to do and the benefits, because this is also, when you talk about victims, it's also about closure. And a number of victims tell us sometimes that going through a criminal justice process, the distance between them and their perpetrator is so wide, they don't know really what's going on or how it's happened. You bring them closer together, good explanation and good control. This isn't something you want to do in an amateurish way, or somebody to just turn up and think, I'll give it a go, because there are some risks, significant risks around this. But by good conversation by having a team that know what they're doing, to ensure that we continue with the conversation going through and manage what they expect and the interactions, then not specifically. I don't know, Jules, whether you've got any specific examples. I don't have any examples to your question. Have people kind of said, well, that wasn't punitive enough? But it isn't, but
yeah.
That's about the explanation. It's not about being punitive. This is about actually, it can and ought to be hard on the offender to face up to and confront what they've done, because it's, the crimes generally, victim-based crimes have an impact on victims, and it's about exposing the perpetrator to that, but also giving the victim that this person isn't the big scary monster that you start to develop. There's somebody who's probably very vulnerable themselves, or weak, or just taking advantage of a situation, and actually you, the individual, weren't the one that was targeted, just happened to be, a chance encounter or an opportunity that somebody's taken at your expense. So I can't give you my experience, people saying, oh, no, that doesn't work. There's always the risk of that, but I don't know, Jules.
Well, so through the court resolution team, we refer 100% of conditional cautions through to the RJ Hub for review anyway. The take-up is just shy of 15%, but I haven't got any data on whether the 15% continue through to the outcome stage, but that's the take-up rate. So I know it's limited in terms of resource, but the referral numbers are significantly increasing. And equally, you have seen within the paper, there's national recognition for the work Norfolk and Suffolk are doing around RJ, which is particularly rewarding for the team and encouraging for us. But so about 15% take-up rate.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm getting a few bits of correspondence on that, so that might be again something that we talk about in a bit more detail over time. Thank you. Okay, code 5.
That is
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. So pillar 5 is supporting victims. A number of things. There's a breadth of areas from the constabulary perspective covered in this paper, reaching from victim code compliance to obsteteria, the victim witness support team, and then antisocial behaviour and preventative orders. If I just start with the compliance for the victims code, you'll see on page 77 there's a table at the top, table 21, which gives an idea of the achievements that we've made around victim code compliance. The victim code compliance is managed through the supporting victims subgroup, which I know we've talked here about before. There were 3 priorities set out for that specific subgroup to focus on in terms of the victims code, particularly around trying to focus on some priorities rather than doing everything at the same time. Those 3 were the receipt of victim information letter, the provision of information about the investigation and prosecution, and the offer of a victim personal statement. And it's really reassuring to see within that table that we have seen increases in those areas, which shows that awareness raising and communication around that particularly is making those efforts, making those differences that we wanted to see. I think that's probably the key point around the victim code compliance. We will be held to account for compliance with that code, as you're aware anyway, and so we'll continue to work on that across the organisation. In terms of Soteria, we're continuing to embed the national operating model locally in Norfolk with a dedicated project manager. There's been a significant amount of training undertaken as detailed in the paper here. And the use of both audits and peer reviews shows that willingness to continually improve and revisit the service. I think we've probably talked enough about the VAWS team, unless you want to. No. The tables in here do show both the impact on victims, but equally the impact on the members of the team from a welfare and wellbeing perspective, which we do continually keep oversight of. Just moving on to antisocial behaviour, 3 points for me around antisocial behaviour really, and the vulnerability that we identify through that. There has been a reduction in the number of high-risk antisocial behaviour cases recently, which is really reassuring. The Neighbourhood Policing Improvement Board, which is mentioned here on page 80, talks about monitoring the quality and quantity of community behaviour orders and community protection notices to identify trends. And in relation to Operation Focus, again, you heard mention of that in the action updates, just around antisocial behaviour hotspots and the way that we are using our resources to target those particular areas and address the vulnerability. They were the key points that I was going to raise out of this paper, Commissioner, and ask if you have any questions.
So as you pointed out, we talked extensively around the VAWS team and domestic violence already. So hopefully, sort of bringing those together has been helpful. So just have two questions. First one on the with respect to Operation Converter. Could you just talk us through that, and in particular, where you mentioned increasing victim satisfaction within that section? Could you just say something around that and what that means in practice, or how that's measured, and/or how that's measured?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm more than happy to pick that up for you. Operation Converter gives us an opportunity for victims of crime, which under other circumstances wouldn't get justice, for us to look at patterns of crime and go back to and speak with perpetrators, so whether they're burglars, car criminals, and speak with them and say, look, this fits into your MO, this is your sort of pattern, and we'll go in and have those sorts of debates. We then look at that and have that taken into consideration. So it's not a charge, but it's a taken into consideration that the court's taken into consideration to understand that full pattern of behaviour. What it means to the victim is that we found the right individual, and that right individual is potentially behind bars or is serving a sentence for something else, but they at least get closure. We see the investment, not least, to give that victim closure, because we now know what we're doing around, they're not just outstanding crimes that haven't been solved. They've got an individual who's admitted the offence, connected to the offence, and then we can go back to the victim and say, look, yes, we've got closure on that one. It's not a charge, but it's taken into consideration, and the magistrate and or the judge will take that into account by the very nature of it against the charges that are already being leveled.
And so in terms of force data, will we see those up converter kind of aspects in terms of detected but
Yes.
not charged,
Yeah, it's all
basically?
part of the,
Yeah.
it's all part of our outcome rate.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So then my only other question was in relation to the Neighbourhood Policing Improvement Board. So we talk about, and you just picked up on the identified trends across the county. Could you just sort of say something around what sort of trends are being picked up? You know, what kind of findings are you getting from that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the key outcome was the identification of differing working practices across the county in the different districts. So one of the key trends was around the use of antisocial behaviour stage 1 warning letters. So Kings Lynn and West Norfolk had issued nearly 500 letters where other districts had only issued 100. And upon review, it looked that was attributed to the practice around issuing warnings alongside dispersal notice. So what we've done now is looked at ways to replicate that across the district so that there's more consistency and no geographical difference. That's just an example of one of the areas where that has assisted in identifying differences. The other thing which has been raised from various different districts, it relates to failed behaviour order applications. And as well as discussing that and looking at opportunities to use the same staff member to present those for consistency again. I have raised that with CPS colleagues just to discuss whether or not their prosecutors are aware of the impact and why those behaviour orders are being requested in the beginning, and they are doing some work in partnership with us on those and their success or not at court.
I'm extremely conscious of the time. If anyone needs to depart, please do. But we're on to pillar 6.
There's going to be a bit of a double act on this
Yeah.
one. So I think Julie's going to cover the verification related matters and then Merrick the rest of the paper.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So for me, again, in terms of road users being safe on our roads, there's a significant amount of information in the paper around roads policing, and I know that is a particular passion of yours, so I'm sure you've read through that in some detail. There's a couple of points that I was going to pick out. The first one is we have seen some increases in all areas around the KSI data, so the killed and serious injury collision data, which you'll see on page 88 in table 23. We had 18 fatal collisions in Norfolk between the 1st of January and the 13th of June this year, and 19 fatalities as a result of that. The impact on the community here obviously can't be underestimated, but nor can the impact on those people that are attending these fatalities regularly. And so the welfare and well-being of the teams is of predominant importance from our command perspective. The other thing I was going to raise was around the mapping to identify hotspots for collisions, particularly involving vulnerable road users such as motorcyclists, cyclists, etc. And we're doing some work to overlay causation and temporal data, which probably comes back to the action point around crash and the environmental factors that will all feed in together in terms of what we're doing to address these increases, both from a single agency, but also partnership perspective. On page 89, we go on to talk about young drivers. And I think, again, from your involvement and engagement through the Safety Camera Partnership team, you'll know about the investments made through the surplus there around young driver education coordinator positions and fatal 4 education that we give to young people aged between 15 and 19. We've reached over 1,500 students, which I think is really impactful in terms of that education and prevention. But equally, it's that support around the family and the work of the family liaison officers when such fatalities or incidents occur. I'll leave the commercial vehicle unit stats with the exception of raising Operation Foxtail. I think we have raised that in a previous paper. Particularly proud of the staff that have delivered this. This has been self-generated proactive activity targeting organised criminality on the roads, and some significant results there in the first quarter of this year. Around 151 vehicles stopped, 14 people arrested, but 26 vehicles seized. That really has come into its own in relation to our work cross department and cross command, which is really pleasing to read. They were the only things I was going to talk about in terms of roads. I'll hand over to
Okay,
my right.
okay, so highlights, probably I'll pick out on the hate crime reduction and compared to the last 12 months, being a fifth and a quarter against the long-term average. There's been the work ongoing with the PCC around the efforts on the hate crime awareness week. In terms of right camera person, just to touch on, we are seeing some reductions even in the midst of our summer demand peak season. We did see 1,000 fewer calls into the control room and 1,000 fewer attendances, and some of those were grade A's and grade B's, which back to the pressures we talked about earlier in response is of note. Probably another example is just spawned from the Neighbour Policing Improvement Board operation Octane, which is now actually shortlisted for a national problem solving award, was that piecing together of things that were being seen across the county and then one partnership approach to try and address it. And then I will just highlight a bit of behavioural insights feeding in as well instead of embedding problem solving. So it's being brought into the student officer training in more depth. Equally, there's a redrafting of a letter with a bit of that kind of nudge theory type efforts going in. So some interesting bits which again are being piloted on behalf of the national. And then finally, I just need to put a formal thanks noted to all the volunteers, all the community speed watch that put in a great deal of effort, which is recorded in this paper. The one sort of risk to highlight is that currently we're in a pause for recruitment for specials owing to the change from College of Policing. We clearly need to address that in line with the 13,000 manifesto pledge. And there is work ongoing with that, but they are probably a key highlights.
Okay, thank you. So we'll agree, and I feel like I need to apologise now for more questions, sorry. I'll do it, talk really fast. So, really, so mindful of the fact that we've got the roundtable coming up, so I don't want to spend lots and lots of time on this, but just some observations around the data and the partnership working. I think probably the simplest question to ask at this point is anyone within that team, the wider team, looking at the use of the SAMS2 data from a problem solving point of view rather than from a 85th percentile, do we go, not go, binary point of view?
Single agency, no. Joint agency, yes.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that's probably a very short answer,
And
but
that's-
probably gives you what you need for
It
the
does.
question. But
Yeah.
I think the restructuring around the road safety partnerships should lead to improved use of that as an evidence base.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is where we need to get to, I think.
No, I agree. And at the moment, I'm still in the stage where it's looking through darkly on that one. So that's helpful just in terms of directing my attention. Thank you. So this is, I think, linked to traffic offence reports, but it's a little bit left field. And I think it's actually touching on, we were talking earlier with Nick around the kind of day-to-day experience of people with the police and that kind of thing. So again, just reflecting on engagement discussions. So the issue of obstructing the highway. So I'm not just talking about pavement parking, but obstructing the highway in general. And I'm alive to what constitutes a highway and what doesn't constitute a highway, and all of that kind of quite problematic area, which members of the public don't necessarily understand. I have received comments on this specifically from every part of the county: Sheringham, Windham, Kings Lynn, Mattershall, Great Yarmouth. I mean, just there is no part of the county this doesn't affect, and I think a lot of your engagement team will recognise it as coming up in snap meetings and that kind of thing. So my observation is that there are two kind of elements to this, and it's I suppose I'm inviting a discussion on this more widely rather than kind of looking at an answer now. But one part of this is, let's call it normal inconsiderate parking behaviour, which then obstructs the footway for people, wheelchair users, people with pushchairs, that kind of thing. And if and when that constitutes an offence, and if and when police officers actually do something about it, there is a persistent but consistent perception that nothing is done around that. So it'd be interesting just to know your thoughts on that in general. But then there's a second element, which is, I'm just going to call it this for the interests of brevity, which is a perception that there is a maliciousness to it, where people feel victimised by often a neighbour, or certainly a repeat, in layman's terms, offender, but you see what I mean? Deliberately parking their vehicle in front of a person's home, in front of a person's drive, or a footpath within their property, which has the effect of stopping them accessing or exiting their own property. And in particular, I've spoken to a number of disabled people, wheelchair users, where their experience of it is highly suggestive of a malicious element. And the reason why I bring this is just because we were talking about that kind of day-to-day undermining of something around credibility. My question for you, I suppose, Julie, at this point, is just, are you aware of anything that is happening within that space? And if not, perhaps this is just something that we have a discussion about in a bit more detail in the future.
The very short answer would be I'm not aware, but I think that the response would be that from our perspective, from a roads and armed policing team perspective, their predominant focus is going to be organised criminality on the roads, killed and serious injuries and fatal fall, and therefore their time and ability to respond to those more neighbourhood issues, whether they be malicious or your description as more normal, unsociable parking, shall I say, probably would fall across local policing around local beat managers, engagement officers. I think there's work we could do there, but that would be cross command rather than the roads and armed policing team. I think that's probably worth another discussion, particularly with parish council reps, our engagement teams, communication officers, just so there's an understanding of what constitutes a highway and not, and then when an offence is committed and not.
Might also be something there for the CSP actually, because certainly where I pick it up, we're increasingly seeing this on newly built estates. And yeah, there's something about how we did design this out as an issue when it comes to adequacy of parking as well, I think. But it's not unusual, I think, for some of our beat managers to find themselves trying to respond to those more neighbourhood related issues. And certainly, I'm sure there's many a neighbourhood dispute that we've attended that has parking at its origin as well.
And I think
we would be particularly, Julie's absolutely right in terms of that prioritisation around other demands, but I think where it's impacting upon accessibility and things like that, we certainly want to be prioritising those more general parking matters.
And the reason why I raise it here is because, just as for the public, the police are like the justice system. So a road is a road is a road.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a lot. So people have talked with me about not just if they're wheelchair users or levels of accessibility and that kind of perception of a malicious intent, but also things like drug sales happening from a neighbouring property, that kind of thing, where you've got a perception of that going on and a lot of activity, car-based activity, which is antisocial at best. So just sort of raising it here because it falls into that category. Public, I think, is relevant. But yeah, it would be, I think, helpful to sort of potentially pick that up and see how that can go forward. Okay, thank you. And then my only other question is on the hate crime piece. Find it and made a note. Two observations. I've been looking at the data. Do seem to be quite clear reporting differences across districts. I don't know if you've got any observations around that. I've sort of struggled to believe that there are districts where genuinely nothing happens. 10 months out, but we have pretty consistent zero reporting. So any observations around that would be welcome. And then the Stop Hating Norfolk training, your observation that uptake has been slow. It'd be helpful to know who that training is directed at and how many were hoped to be reached and versus actual uptake, even just gut feel, not necessarily such hard numbers, but that would be helpful.
Yes, so the observation around the hate crime data is in fact one of the parts of the neighbourhood policing improvement board to get to consider out exactly why there are such parity across the areas. So in fact, it's a good question, and I think we're noting back if that's okay. And then likewise the training. I'm afraid I'm not briefed on the particular detail of exactly the numbers, so I'll come back to you on that one as well.
Okay, that'd be great. Perhaps we can pick that up in a separate meeting of our sort of catch-ups.
Absolutely.
In general, it'd be good to just have a bit more, speak to you a little less on the hate crime sort of piece. Yeah, thank you. And hate incidents in that as well, not just the crime
Yeah.
component piece. Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Bit on page 6. Okay, so again, apologies everyone for being overrunning. That brings us on to 11 around emerging operational or organisational risks, which is the verbal update.
Yes, so probably the thing that's causing me the most concern at the moment, we covered already at the start of the additional finance and what next year is going to look like. I know we've discussed this in the regular meetings that you and I have, but there's a lot of uncertainty around what our funding is going to look like next year. We've got significant savings requirements to deliver. It's not balancing the budget that's the concern, it's balancing the budget and maintaining the level of service that you want. That's always the issue. So we are working our way through that at the moment, but because there's so many moving parts to it and variables dependent upon many of the factors that you're aware of, it is a challenge. So quite a period of uncertainty really at the moment when it comes to the finances. I think as well, in a way linked to that, we are aware of the new government's priority missions. We await some detail as to how the constabulary is going to be asked to implement them. Of course, I think that will only be known once the funding is known as well. So, but we remain ready to act on that once more certainty is provided. There'll perhaps be a couple of other areas that I just want to brief you on offline, maybe this afternoon if opportunity allows. But I think it would be those areas that are the main ones.
Okay, and then that brings us on to AOB.
Quick one, just to clarify a point you raised earlier, the 327 and the 377.
Yes.
The 327 is the complaints opened.
Yeah.
And the 377 is complaints closed.
Oh,
So you have a lag of opened into closed, and then we haven't cleared that they would want to open. So that's the clarification.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think I did caveat it with it. I may have misinterpreted.
No, there is always the issues of whether all of our issues, when you put a time limit, you gate them, then obviously you've got bits that you can never kind of align that. Absolutely.
Yeah, having two numbers in common doesn't make.
No, not maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Any other business from around the table? No, right. Sincere apologies for overrunning by 9 minutes. I will endeavour to improve my timekeeping. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate your time. And again, thank you to members of the public for joining us.
Falling down the road 9 minutes ago, so.
Oh, was it? Okay.